The second era of the Overwatch League is off to an interesting start. The experiment of changing to Overwatch 2 has been a lot of fun, but with it has come challenges, controversy, and of course, a slow off-season. We really don't know what's to come after this year, so let's enjoy the ride, shall we? Time for the annual ATP Preseason Power Rankings. For those who don't know how my rankings work, they're based on where I believe teams will finish in the regular season standings. I place teams where I do, based on how much their roster appeals to me, as well as potential strengths, weaknesses, and the occasional scrimbucks or rumors. I mostly went heart over head this year, because last year I overthought things and very much regretted it. This video will primarily cover my overall rankings 1 through 20, but this year I'm also including their regional rank on the graphic, so you could see how that would look too. Oh, and as a quick heads up, I will not be ranking any of the contenders teams competing in the East, as we don't know who they are just yet. So let's just keep it to what we know. That's about all I have to say, so let's get into it. And at number 20, we have a bit of an asterisk. The Chengdu Hunters are going to be slotted here, mostly because they're basically dead. The Overwatch League announced they will not be competing in the upcoming spring stage as they further contemplate their future. Supposedly, everything's shut down over there, and they aren't really looking to spend money on a roster from the looks of it. So I'm going to assume the Hunters likely aren't playing this year, so for all intents and purposes, consider their ranking 20th/incomplete. So for the first real team we can rank at 19th is the Vegas Eternal. This team not only has last year's OWL experience under their belt, but also a lot of time working together in the past in contenders with coaching it all. And with that in mind, you'd think the experience would help them grow and maybe be a bit higher than this, but their stock is actually at an all-time low. It started with a defeat at the hands of Sumito's team in the USA World Cup trials, but then things got significantly worse in the Pro-Am when they got 2-0'd by the LA Valiant, a team that existed for all of 2 weeks. Plus, in general, even if these rumors weren't a thing, they'd still be ranked low because this roster is pretty lackluster. Despite all the work they've done in the past together, they might struggle to win even a single game. Number 18. The LA Valiant. The Valiant on paper don't stack up all that well, even against the weakest teams in the league. But the fact that they could actually play decently, with a little bit of practice only, makes you hope they could potentially pull off an upset this year. But considering their lack of support from the organization as a whole, and still being a glorified contenders roster really, you'd expect the Valiant to be a low-tier performer this year. They're working with the absolute minimum, and you'd expect their gameplay to reflect upon this. At 17th, I've got the alexyOWL, and this is where the fun begins. The low end to middle of the pack feels like a gigantic mess. I decided to slot alexyOWL here because I don't love the feel of their roster or where alexyOWL stand as an org. Individually, I'd say the talent is there. Fits, Creative, Kellen, Psycho, Shockwave. If they were to get the ball rolling, they could be pretty decent. A competitive, middle-of-the-pack result is not an unrealistic outcome, but it's going to be a big challenge for them since the West is quite top-heavy, and if they aren't on the same page, like we all suspect, then things could get very ugly. What's important to remember, New York fans, is that this is by no means a god-tier roster, and many of your players have never actually been on a mixed team before, and the org itself actually has taken a pretty big fall from grace compared to the first few years in the league, so there's an obvious divide that could take serious work to overcome. And with how mid this team feels, that might not ever develop into something. They might not ever gain the confidence needed to escape the bottom of the standings. New York possessed some of that foundation you're looking for, but not enough to really warrant a high ranking, I'd say. Anyway, at number 16, I'm rolling with the Shanghai Dragons. And not gonna lie, I feel pretty weird about this. Just knowing what this team has been since 2020 would probably suggest this is maybe a bit too low. Coach Moon is still there after all, and the Eastern Conference is pretty wide open, but if we look strictly at what they are working with on their team, this might be one of the weirdest groups in the history of professional Overwatch. Their championship core is gone, and the return value simply is not there. I love the Hisu and Viper pickups. They're both fantastic and could make for a pretty respectable damage line, but what do they have outside of that that stands out in a not-so-negative way? You've got Gangnam Jin at main support, Bebe as a washed-up player coach, And what on earth do you expect from the Fleta solo tank and DM support? It's a massive risk to even transition one player, let alone multiple like this, and expect them to survive. It all feels very sus to me, and I have little to no hope that it actually works out. It just feels like too much of a gamble. This team is not only inflexible on paper, but highly questionable. Compared to most teams in the East, they feel incomplete. The Dragons will have to improve drastically over little time, and it's just too hard to see that happening. Number 15. The Vancouver Titans. It's still not where fans would like them to be, but hey, progress is progress. This team is a fun underdog that approached the offseason exactly how they needed to. They built around their budding star Aspire, and they gave him a carry-oriented tank in Punk, a reliable support in Crimzo, and of course the real story, Sugar Free. This man's been waiting 4 years for this moment. We've been waiting for this flex DPS prodigy since 2019, and he's in a similar vein to Patty Pan where it feels like he's not going to let this opportunity go to waste. He is ready to do all of his fans very proud. Despite not playing the game professionally for years, he's still a highly dangerous flex who doesn't look rusty in the slightest. Sugar Free and Aspire could catch some people off guard big time this year, and they're the kind of duo you have to be worried about. The issue is the Titans are not mind-blowing, and they don't have that much depth either. There's a real chance that some of these other mid-table teams jump ahead of them or outclass them altogether. But at the very least, I'd say that this team has stability and a lot of upside. Do not be surprised in the slightest if Vancouver finish noticeably higher than this and are perhaps in the race for the play-ins. And speaking of teams in that vein, next we have the Washington Justice. And honestly, I don't feel that good about this placement. Like, at all. Looking at the talent in some of their offseason choices, I feel like this placement is justified. I'd say that they aren't spectacular anywhere outside of like flex DPS, but they just have that feeling to them that you're looking for in an underdog. You've got your star player in AlphaYi, who seriously might level up even further as a main contributor, and then you have Ben Best, FD God, and a coach who have already destroyed expectations in the past. Add in Flora with a chip on his shoulder as well, and you might have yourself a scrappy underdog. But just going on what I see on paper, they'll have to give it an A+ effort if they intend to finish anywhere near the top of the standings. Synergy-wise, I'd say there's some questions, and honestly, I'm not a huge fan of their backline either. And in a region that's this competitive, any sort of weakness or miscommunication is going to cost you big time. Anyways, placing at my number 13 slot is the Guangzhou Charge. The Charge are one of the few teams to literally not change a single thing, and this could be a good or bad thing depending on your point of view. It's good because this core was pretty solid in the second half of 2022. With more experience working together in a pretty wide open Eastern region, they could make the playoffs this year. You've got a reliable main support option, good tank help, and perhaps the most underlooked DPS in the entire game, Choi Se-wan. This guy is a monster on all accounts, and if given what he had towards the end of last year, but for an entire season, he could dominate the East and rise to a true superstardom level. However, the lack of moves they made might be a bad thing, because the same weaknesses could also get exploited. A lack of a carry at flex support, depending solely on Piggy as your tank, Jimmy's ability outside of sniper heroes, the possibility of regression. There's a lot of things that could worry you as a Charge fan. But if there's any sort of bright side here, it's again that the Charge have what it takes to be even higher than this. I'd say they match up with most APAC teams decently. It's just that in my opinion, a handful of other rosters have that slightly higher ceiling. Between the holes and lack of proven feats, middle of the pack is where they stay. At number 12, I'm rocking with the London Spitfire, another team with little changes compared to last season, so it makes sense to put them near the Charge. Now, I know what some of y'all are going to say in the comments. You doubted London last year, and look how good they were. You're going to regret this. But this is a new year, and while they made no real upgrades, many of their enemies did. It's difficult to have total faith in London to replicate that kind of success. They stagnated, and this league is all about progression. The coaching is excellent, surely, and I do love Sparker, and Hottie, and Landon, but what's new? What keeps them on top of their game? London didn't get much better at all, and I worry about their flexibility. It worked last year when playing around Hottie, I give them credit for that, but this year could be a totally different ballgame. What happens when what you're playing either becomes unoptimal or is totally countered? How do London adjust and make it work still? I like the Spitfire, and I love the culture they formed there. It's just that right now, in their current state, replicating what they did will be a lot more challenging. Now at number 11, I'm gonna rock with the Seoul Infernal. I feel pretty torn. MN3 and Zest are another year more experienced, and I'd say that they could definitely take a jump to a whole new level that puts the rest of APAC to shame. But a lot of other guys on this team could either sink or swim with a chance to start anew. Specifically, Skewed and Mag. Skewed is intriguing and someone I definitely like. Just based on his experience with LA Gladiators, he has shown that he can be a threat and someone who can contribute to a championship level team. It's just that now he's finally getting the chance to be a starting flex support in the Overwatch League. And how does he do in those circumstances? Does he thrive, or does he show that he more so benefited from the system he was in? Meanwhile, Mag also has a lot of the same upside, but so far his career has mostly been a letdown. And as the one and only tank player available for Seoul Infernal as of right now, he's got enormous pressure on his shoulders, and it's unclear if he's ready to bear that burden. When I look at this Seoul team, it doesn't stand out as a dominator. A lot of development has to happen in order for them to get there. Still though, bare minimum, Infernal are very capable of being a playoff level team. With that DPS line, there's always a chance. But how much further can they take it than this? How much more can they progress and evolve? That's the question that prevents me from ranking them any higher for the time being. Starting off the top 10 is our other Seoul team, the OGs, the Dynasty. The Dynasty are much worse compared to last year, but still are somewhat respectable. Just having Prophet and Void makes you confident they can still be a respectable group. Who I also trust though is Lee Soo-min. He might be a rookie player and all, but he's probably the best prospect in this class at his position. Coach Toby did wonders for Vindame last year. Look at how far he came in such little time. It's easy to say that that's possible for Lee Soo-min as well. No guarantee, but you like his chances. Seoul Dynasty have the pieces needed to possibly make another playoff push, but nobody out there can deny that a lot has to go their way. As a 5-man roster, I'd say that both rookies have a lot of responsibility that they may not be able to handle, and as much as I love Void, in some metas he may not make the cut. And do I even need to mention Krillin at main support? That's pretty weird. The Dynasty have a good balance of superstars, veterans, and young players, but the roster itself is not out of this world. They may have it in them to occasionally body a top dog, but I'm pretty worried about their consistency this year, which is why they're ultimately middle of the pack. And breaking into the number 9 spot is the Boston Uprising, and this feels incredibly wrong for so many reasons. Usually, I don't go against my projections like this, but recent news has changed my thoughts on this group. Cause surprise, surprise, internally things are pretty bad right now. Apparently there has been some disagreement between players and coaching, and it's gotten to a point where they're starting to skip out on scrims. And Boston only made it worse by thinking it's a good idea to tweet that everything's fine over there. That is probably the worst thing you could do. You're just asking to get exposed, and that's exactly what Dante, RuPaul, Gator, Majed, and others did for canceling scrims, ending them early, and taking breaks mid-set that are 40 plus minutes. That's 4 different teams for those of you who are counting at home. If I made you believe this team was going to be different because they were so talented, there's no way they'd fail, I'm sorry. It looks like the doubters were totally right, at least right now. Boston are headed towards a dangerous place that could lead to their impending demise. If anything, 9th still might be too high, but I am choosing to believe they could possibly turn things around. Because again, if they can figure some of those things out internally, the talent is right there. Smurf plus that backline is amazing stability. Boston have an incredibly high ceiling, and most of their team has won a ring before with the exception of Decay and Kalios. That is why I choose to believe there is some sort of hope. Although, even if they figure things out, they still do face some question marks that make me think they're not top tier, specifically at flex DPS. Think about it. What happens if things go beyond Tracer and maybe 1 or 2 comfort picks? Do you really trust Decay and Striker on Mei, Genji, Echo, and others? I know I certainly don't. Boston feel a little one-dimensional, and at a top level, that's not gonna cut it. I was always of the mindset that one of the top teams on paper during this offseason would fail to be top tier, and Boston, with the recent news, have made that choice very easy. Number 8, the Toronto Defiant. Now this is a roster I can get behind. From top to bottom, they are extremely respectable. The players, they're all very talented and very young, and they're also friends who have not only proved themselves at the Overwatch League level during their rookie seasons, but also dominated contenders together in years past, and their coaching staff also looks to be top-notch. There are multiple levels to all of their positions, and each and every one of those individuals can be a big-time contributor. You've got a solid tank player in Kaluj, a potential superstar in Hydron, Speedly's immense potential is something to think about, and a support trio that provides maximum coverage for meta diversity. Defiant have a lot of what you're looking for. Confidence, star power, synergy, multiple playstyles, a good environment to work in. It's the making of a potential top roster, and I would not be surprised in the slightest if I seriously end up underrating them. My only gripe is they don't quite have the superstars to make a serious playoff or tournament push. I feel a lot of other teams out there just have a lot more of those it factor guys that make a difference in the long run and will be the people to end up defeating them in those really close games. Defiant are respectable, and I think they will finish pretty high up there. I just don't see them in that upper echelon of the league. Number 7, the LA Gladiators. You know, at the beginning of this offseason, I was a serious doubter of this roster, but the more I think about it, the more I start to feel this team is still respectable. Kai, Kevster, Yaki, that could be one of the most insane DPS trios of all time. I mean, just having Kev alone gives you a fighting chance. And the support trio is pretty notable with playmaking and flexibility too, but the thing is, there's probably a limit to what LA is capable of. There's natural worry about keeping up with the best support lines in the league, I'd say, and Dante as the solo tank could be problematic. I'd say there are some exploitable weaknesses. I get this feeling the Glads play a lot of close games this year, which they could win, and it's in those games where I think they will get exposed if their DPS cannot carry them hard enough. There is potential to exceed expectations with this group, but if they want it, if they want to get there, they have to seriously work hard at it and be extremely clutch, because I'm telling you right now, they're not going to blow a lot of teams out. Number 6, the Florida Mayhem. This one might draw some controversy. I'm honestly pretty high on the Mayhem this year, and I'm not just saying that because of their Mickey Mouse preseason tournament run. The Mayhem have a good lineup. It's balanced and quite flexible. Pretty much all of their guys are second-year players who will look and feel more refined with their games after grinding during the offseason and learning from their mistakes in their rookie years. And this even could include Checkmate to a certain extent, who is basically in his second full year as a starting DPS. With all those guys and their potential to take their games to new heights, Mayhem could be pretty terrifying, and again, everyone contributes good qualities that makes this team a dark horse. Someone for his hero pool, Merit for his consistency, Chorong for being the upgraded they needed at main support, RuPaul for stable backline presence, and Checkmate for being the leader of the team. The Mayhem are very interesting. They can succeed in a lot of situations and most compositions, and they match up well with most rosters in the league. The Mayhem could be a serious problem if they continue to show progress. However, other rosters just have more of that guaranteed, proven star power you're looking for to get more wins on the year. The Mayhem don't yet have that experience or confidence to convince you they are title favorites just yet. They're close, but not quite there. But by the time this season ends, maybe we have a different conversation. But for now, let's move on to the beginning of our top 5, where we start with the Dallas Fuel. Another one that I may get some flack for. Dallas undoubtedly got much worse during the offseason. I mean, that's pretty obvious. They lost 3 top-tier players at their positions and replaced them with a far worse support line, and that's it. That doesn't give you the feeling of a top-tier roster. But something tells me they're still better than people think. Regardless of the losses, they've still got Hanbin, and they still have an excellent DPS line with Edison coming off the best season of his career. And I mean, Bliss at least has a lot of potential, and MCD did play the best Overwatch of his life under Coach Rush 4 years ago. And just remember, ladies and gentlemen, this is based on where teams finish in the overall standings. Nothing more, nothing less. They're likely not a top 5 roster on paper, but now they are in the considerably weaker Eastern region where they could accumulate a lot more wins. Rush-led teams also have proven to be resilient, and I have no doubt this team will do much of the same. They've ran into other problems in the past, and they always find ways to adjust, make it work, and still be a good team. But I'd be lying to you if I told you I have faith in them to defend their title this year. A 5-man roster with a suspect backline and way less star power? Yeah, no. The Fuel are a respectable group still, but they are definitely far from the championship favorites. At number 4, I've got my king of the APAC region, the Hangzhou Spark. Even if APAC is a firestorm this year, a few teams likely find a way to dominate. And if there's one team I expect to be in that conversation, it's the Spark. Any weaknesses this team has is partially made up for in coaching, synergy, and of course, the damage line. Shy Leave might be one of the most insane, stacked duos ever created. DPS carry potential is so important in Overwatch 2, and the Spark excel here. The DPS line can literally match any other in the league, and I'm confident about that. We're talking 2 MVP caliber players that can dominate their roles. And I especially mean that if Leave gets back into his true form. That damage line is going to win games all on their own. Think about what Shy did during the playoffs last year and how hard he carried. Now give him the help of Leave. That's a pretty scary thought. But if I'm being honest, this roster isn't amazing outside of that. They've got a good, but not great flex support option, and 2 tanks that may not be all that special outside of a Winston meta. Nonetheless, I still am pretty hyped about the Spark though. If there's one APAC team that I trust to go on a run, it's definitely them because of how much they could carry at DPS. Occupying the number 3 spot is the Houston Outlaws, and I'm pretty high on this group. They aren't perfect, and there's a lot of individual egos to manage, but the Outlaws have the making of a championship caliber team. They have the proper guidance thanks to Junkbuck still being there, and people like Violet and Fearless have already won a championship before. Combine that with the motivation of their other guys who have not won a title yet, and that will make Houston play like their lives depend on it. In this kind of situation, I think that people like Pelican and Shu know what's on the line here. They know that this is likely their last real chance to win a ring, and they're not going to waste it. What's there not to like here? A balanced tank line with championship experience? Pelican at DPS? Perhaps the most dangerous backline of all time? They've got guys everywhere who could win games all by themselves. It is an explosion of insane mechanics at every location, leading to a 3rd, maybe even 4th kind of DPS feel at all times. The Outlaws simply need to gel together. That's all they gotta do. Now, admittedly, I realize this could be a problem that brings them down. They might try and play it, as we say in the IRL sports world, hero ball, instead of actually playing all together. This is a real possibility to consider when ranking them, especially when not many of their guys have actually played together in the previous years. But cause Houston have some good people in charge, and the players have such insane ceilings, I feel a lot more could go right than wrong. Sliding into my number 2 spot is the Atlanta Reign. Atlanta's peak level of performance this season could be off the charts. When your core is Lip, Chio, and Fielder, you feel pretty confident in your team, and that's not even considering the potential of Vigilante, Donghack, and Stalker. Vigilante, I think, has such insane mechanics, he's very highly rated by people internally, and he could help make the Atlanta Reign the most dangerous backline in the league. Then with somebody like Stalker, I think as a full-time starter finally, he could possibly be a top-level DPS. And while Donghack is definitely a mystery, I am a firm believer that he's probably pretty good if Atlanta were so willing to pick him up. And I mean, the fact that you just have that true X factor at DPS like Lip to counteract your propers of the world gives Atlanta that true title contender status. It's just a matter of how much you believe things could go wrong. Because the Reign are of course not invincible, that should be made very clear. A first-time head coach on a mostly Korean team with 2 tanks who may not be superstars means that things are definitely not perfect. However, I'd like to think that most of their issues, or potential issues I should say, are minor concerns at most currently. The likelihood of things going wrong with this kind of team feels pretty minimal. They're just too dangerous to not be in that upper tier of teams, and if they're hoisting up the trophy in 6 months from now, don't be surprised. And that leaves us at number 1, where I'm picking the Shock. All the Redditors and Overreact Andes might get upset with me based on what happened in the Pro-Am, I guess, but all I'ma say is, let them cook. This is literally O2 Blast at their peak. A lot of the league's most exciting, upcoming talent are all on this team. A young core like this will have the drive to pick things up fast, learn from their mistakes, and improve very quick. And with Krusty's discipline to guide them, the sky's the limit with these guys. This team is definitely scarier than last year's. The tank line, it's just more versatile, and Heesang might be the best prospect from contenders at DPS. And that's ultimately what makes the Shock so much better in the end, right? Formulating a team that can better support Proper, that he's more comfortable with, but could also fend for themselves at the same time. That was the biggest weakness that the Shock faced last year, and they just might have fixed it. A team that was 1 map away, mind you, from winning the grand finals last year just filled their biggest need. If you have to start worrying about other individuals on this team when they were already so close to winning titles last year, you're in for a crazy battle. And keep in mind, this is not even including Proper. You know, the best player in the world in his 2nd year in the league. Him on his own already makes the Shock so terrifying, but now they are crazy stacked beyond belief potentially. Keep that final word closely in mind though. Potentially, as in, there's no guarantee. The competition is pretty ridiculous, and there's a handful of teams that could finish ahead of them, and a lot of expectations and responsibility is being put on a very young group. There is room to disappoint. They are basically depending on all of their players to live up to the hype and develop, while simultaneously hoping people such as Proper and Vindame and Finn don't regress. It is always a risk when you go young like this. But for me personally, I just feel like this is the right group of guys to handle it based on their past and their credentials and what they've accomplished in high stakes environments already. Proper comes from the same place as the rest of these guys, and look how he turned out for crying out loud. This team possesses the highest potential in the entire league, and I don't want to go against that. A dawn of a new empire could be just around the corner. Sorry, Shock haters, they're not going anywhere. Shock are my number 1 this year, but I don't say that with much confidence whatsoever. In fact, that's how I feel about most of my picks this year, as you get one final overview of what I'm working with. I promised myself I wouldn't overthink or get too over-attached, so I'm not. Right or wrong, these are my choices. Will there be regrets? Bad choices? Yeah. But if I was scared to embarrass myself, I would have stopped making videos ages ago. Like I always say, it's all in good fun. But that basically concludes the annual power rankings for 2023. I hope y'all were entertained all the way through and enjoyed the video even if you thought my takes were garbage. If you did, make sure to leave a like, drop a comment of your own power rankings, and subscribe for more Overwatch League 2023 content. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.